What if the Nazca Lines were never meant to be seen but to be walked? Yes, they are not drawings, they are footsteps, and we've been reading them wrong. I'm Arturo, and this is Latin Laura, from Latin America's history to mysteries and true crime to local legends whispering Latin intrigue. Every tale is verified in archives before it reaches your headphones. Hit subscribe, fresh revelations drop every week, ready for your next campfire debate. At dawn, the desert pretends to be innocent. It lies there like a blank page, pale, quiet, almost bored. And then the camera climbs, and the world changes its mind. The drone rises, and the pampa opens like an eye, and suddenly the earth is no longer sand and stone, it's intention. A hummingbird with wings stretched wider than a city block. A spider pinned like a charm. Lines so long they feel less like drawings and more like decisions, made by hands that trusted time. Here is the first truth that collapses the easy myths. These lines were not primarily made for human aerial admiration, nor solely for their technological complexity. They embody a profound cultural and ritual significance rooted in indigenous ingenuity. Hillsides and slopes and ridges give vantage points, the kind a person can climb with lungs and patience, and from there designs can be planned, checked, corrected, and experienced without wings. Their genius wasn't flight, their genius was turning ground into ritual, and by the end, the lines won't look like drawings anymore. They'll look like footsteps. Down on foot, the Nazca lines feel almost rude. You stand in heat that presses on your skull, stare at gravel, and want the desert to cooperate, to show you the hummingbird, to show you the miracle. But the desert gives you a corridor of cleared stones that leads nowhere, a trapezoid that looks like an accident, a straight line that feels like a stubborn joke. Your boots crunch, your throat dries, and you realize the first trap. At ground level, this place refuses spectacle. So you do what the land has always demanded from humans. You move, you walk, you climb. You choose a small cerro, one of those hills locals pass without ceremony, and as you rise, the lines begin to gather themselves. Not all at once, not like a reveal made for television. More like memory returning in pieces. A curve becomes a beak, an angle becomes a wing. A long straight path becomes something you can feel in your chest, like a corridor built not for travel but for becoming. I have heard the old refrain, the descent of beings from the heavens, the guidance of hands not born of this soil. I do not ignore these theories. I acknowledge them, weigh them, and find them wanting. History demands traces, science requires proof, and neither grants us reason to abandon the earth for the sky. What troubles me more is the implication beneath the claim. To invoke extraterrestrials is to deny the intelligence, patience, and ingenuity of the people who walk this land. It is a reminder to respect and recognize indigenous achievement and knowledge. Because that reflex is older than the UFO story, when achievement exceeds modern expectations, its authors must be diminished. As if indigenous knowledge were insufficient, as if order, geometry, and vision could only arrive through conquest, by empire or by stars. But the desert doesn't need spaceships. It requires a rope, it needs stakes, it needs hands, it needs community. The miracle isn't technology. The miracle is cooperation in a place that punishes waste, and ritual becomes the social technology that teaches dispersed communities how to move as one. Look closely at the surface, and the trick is simple, almost humble. The pampa wears a dark coat, desert pavement, stones varnished by time, heat, and minerals, a rough skin that looks permanent. Clear those stones away, and the lighter soil beneath appears, bright like exposed bone. Stack the darker stones along the edges, and you get crisp borders that hold the shape. Stakes and ropes keep straight lines honest, and when modern crews replicate the work, small groups can build quickly and accurately because the method is human-scaled. Now imagine the labor without romanticizing it. People squatting under a brutal sun, lifting stones into baskets, piling them along the edges as borders. Wooden stakes planted to mark points, ropes stretched tight to keep lines accurate. A leader calls minor corrections the way a weaver adjusts a pattern. No secret machines, no mystical levitation, just bodies moving in rhythm, a job that becomes a ceremony the longer you do it. The line grows not because one genius invented it, but because many people keep returning, again and again demonstrating collective effort and perseverance. This is southern Peru, where the Andes cast a shadow and the Pacific throws fog like breath. Water is never casual here. Rivers can vanish at the surface and still run underground. The air can be so wet it chills your skin, but the ground stays thirsty. In a place like this, ritual is not decoration, it is survival with a drumbeat. When your crops depend on seasons that refuse to be predictable, you don't only farm, you negotiate with the world and you deal with each other too. Before tourists spoke the Nazca name, there were Paracas traditions along this coast, textiles so complex they look like visions frozen in thread, burials wrapped like secrets, iconography with eyes that stare wider than a human face. Between the last centuries before our era and the first half of the first millennium, those traditions shifted and blended into what we call Nazca. Farther north, on the Paracas Peninsula at Pisco Bay, the Great Candelabra is cut into a coastal hillside, an older cousin voice, same Andean instinct to carve meaning into slope and wind. Then the Nazca world blooms across valleys and desert plains, not as an empire with a single throne, but as communities braided by shared ritual, shared art, shared necessity. They left no writing system to flatter modern historians. Their language is pottery, textiles, bones, canals, and the lines themselves. Their story is not mysterious because it is primitive. Their story is eerie because complex, because they thought in layers we are still learning to read, and because the desert preserves questions as faithfully as it preserves forms. At the heart of that sacred geography stands Cahuachi, once misunderstood as a city and later revealed as something stranger, a pilgrimage center. Not a place where people live day to day, but a place where people arrive to become more than themselves for a season. Adobe mounds rise like frozen waves. Feasts happened. Offerings moved from hand to hand. Ritual knowledge circulated like fire. The evidence left behind in the ceramics and their patterns of movement supports that Kawachi's ceremonial gravity pulled villages into shared cycles, integrating a scattered world through gathering. In a desert like this, engineering is also prayer. The Pukios are not just tunnels, they are subterranean filtration galleries, waterworks designed to supply irrigation and domestic needs where surface water is absent or unreliable. Some still function, still breathing beneath the sand like patient lungs, 36 still breathing when they were carefully recorded, with more likely existing in the past. Think about what that requires: planning, excavation, stonework, maintenance, and a collective memory strong enough to outlast drought. Because the lines are not only pictures, that's what surprises people who come hunting the hummingbird and the spider. The pampa is dominated by geometry, long straight paths, trapezoids that widen like ceremonial stages, and radiating centers where lines converge like spokes. These forms behave like roots more than drawings. They invite movement, they guide feet, they make your body participate, and once you accept that, the puzzle begins to change shape. Up until where the evidence takes us, the strongest lane is this: a ritual landscape tied to water, fertility, and communal coordination. Walk a trapezoid end to end, and you will feel it. The borders of piled stone guide you like rails. The horizon stays blank, stubborn, refusing to reward you with a view. There is no destination except the act itself. Your breath becomes rhythm. Your footsteps become counting. The line turns your body into an instrument. And then the sky returns in its proper place, not as the sole author of meaning, but as part of the conversation, because seasons decide survival, and solstice drama can exist without ruling the whole story. For a long time, outsiders argued over the lines like lawyers fighting over an inheritance, a calendar, a map, a message, a runway. In the 20th century, when airplanes began crossing this coast, the Nazca Lines revealed themselves to passengers who gasped like children. Researchers arrived. Some measured, some photographed, some dedicated their lives. Maria Reiki protected the pampa like a guardian with dust in her lungs. And later, a colder kind of date arrived. Optically stimulated luminescence on geometric lines near Palpa put specific contexts around about AD 400 to 650, a hard time, later Nazca insistence. The Nazca worldview also keeps one blade hidden in the cloth. Trophy heads appear in art and burials, and it's easy for modern minds to reduce them to a clean story of war, enemy, and victory. But isotope studies of strontium, oxygen, and carbon have tested that assumption by asking where people actually grew up, what water they drank, and what landscapes shaped their teeth. One central line of evidence does not support a simple foreign enemy tale. It suggests many trophy heads were local Nazca, making the practice more intimate, more ritual, and more unsettling than a battlefield headline. And the desert keeps surprising us, which should humble anyone who claims certainty. New figures still emerge from slopes when erosion reveals faint grooves. Cats stretched long, strange beings with tongues, lines so light they only appear under careful clearing and good light. But the most chilling bridge between ancient and modern is this: we are still learning to see. A 2024 peer-reviewed PNAS study used deep learning on aerial and satellite imagery to identify hundreds of previously unrecorded geoglyphs. Then archaeologists verified them on the ground, step by step, stone by stone. The Pampa is not finished speaking. So what do we know? With high confidence, we know people made these lines with simple tools and organized labor. We know the method: dark stones cleared to reveal pale earth, borders piled, ropes pulled tight. Works because the desert allows contrast to endure. We know the strongest interpretation links the lines to ritual movement, water, fertility, and the social technology of pilgrimage that turns scattered communities into one coordinated body. We know the sky can participate without dominating, and we see the impulse to blame aliens is not evidence, it's an abdication. If you want the Nazca Lines to feel alive again, stop imagining them as a postcard. Imagine them as dawn footsteps, as a procession leaving the valley with shells from the ocean, gourds of drink, and offerings that wilt fast in the heat. Imagine drums low like a heartbeat. Imagine people entering a corridor of cleared earth where sound changes from crunch to hush. Imagine the desert becoming a temple without walls. Each step is a sentence spoken to the land, and the land listens the way an elder listens, silently weighing. And then imagine the final question that refuses to die. If these lines are prayers, who are they speaking to? The mountains that make rain, the earth that feeds crops, the ancestors who demand continuity, or each other, neighbors teaching neighbors how to cooperate under scarcity, binding a fragile world together through shared walking, shared offerings, shared risk. That's the debate worth having, because it respects indigenous intelligence instead of replacing it with spectacle. So tell me, what do you hear in these lines? A map, a ceremony, a plea, a calendar, a warning? Muchas gracias. Thanks for trekking the hidden trails of Latin America with me. If tonight's story unsettled you, subscribe and ring the bell, because Latin America's darkest stories are far from over.